Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lovis, and today I am super excited because I have a very special guest with me today. This is AE Copenhaver.
Copenhaver? Yeah,
Copenhaver. Would you prefer me to call you Athena or AE, or how would you like to?
You can call me Athena. That's
excellent.
Fine.
And she wrote My Days of Dark Green Euphoria, which by the time this video goes out, you will have seen in my reading roundup video. So you can check that out for a little bit more context, but I will be asking Athena to give us a bit of a summary. So welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan, as I was saying, and I'm really very excited and honored to be here. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Well, yeah, let's dive right in. Do you want to give us a bit of information about you, about your writing journey, and of course about your novel? I mean, it debuted first week of February, right?
That's right.
So you're still kind of riding the debut wave. That's
yes.
Excellent. Yeah. So no spoilers, please, but
yeah, of course. Yeah, that's why it's so exciting to be here with you on your channel. So my writing journey, gosh, so this is my debut novel. This is my first attempt at writing fiction. And I have had a career in environmental and nonprofit industry, basically strategic communications and operations for scientists. That's why I was really excited to talk with you, Lovis, because you're a marine ecologist, I think.
I am,
right?
Yeah.
So I want to say, like, marine ecologists are like my bread and butter. So to put it, like, they're my people, even though I'm not a marine ecologist. But I wrote this book when I was working with a bunch of marine ecologists and evolutionary biologists. And yeah, so I'm kind of like a science fan, but not a scientist myself. So yeah, so this book kind of was born out of my time working at a marine conservation nonprofit. The book in particular, My Days of Dark Green Euphoria, is about a woman who's struggling with eco-anxiety, climate grief, the whole miserable mental health crisis that a lot of young people are going through right now. And she is in search of relief, and she doesn't really know how to find it. And the book is a satire. It's supposed to be kind of absurd and over the top, and while also kind of delivering some hard-hitting truths at the same time. And so our main character, Kara Foster, she ends up becoming obsessed with her boyfriend's mother. Her boyfriend's mother is named Millie, and she is kind of a free-spirited type person who is I want to say, of the sort of boomer generation. And she just has kind of no ecological consciousness whatsoever. And this is a really stark dichotomy. It's a really stark contrast between the two of them. Yeah, it's basically Kara's struggle with finding balance in her climate grief and her eco-anxiety.
I mean, the anxiety that I felt at certain points in this book when she was doing some of her more, I don't know,
extreme over the top.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, what is happening? I don't know how to feel about this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think those are good examples of somebody who's unhealthy, somebody who's really not coping well with the world around her. And how do you kind of take all those emotions and then channel them into something useful or meaningful in your own life? And so the book is really about this character and her guilt. And I mean, I think at one point in the beginning, she's like, she wanted a carbon footprint so light you wouldn't know that she ever existed. How do you can't accomplish that? That's unrealistic. So yeah, so
you like wanted to become a plant or something.
Yes,
I was like, yes. I understand the sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But she was like, no, I'm gonna become a plant.
Yes, I hope people find this, strange and bizarre at the same time as it's absurd and also kind of truthful.
Yep, that pretty much sums up how I felt about this book. I did think it was bizarre and strange, but also really funny. I did laugh. It's some of the things she comes out with. I did, or you come out with, really.
And I think that with the amount of eco-anxiety, I mean, going around and just the reports on it, the articles on it, in that sense, this book is timely. It's meant to provide some relief, comic relief, I hope, in certain moments, just because the misadventures that this character gets up to are so ridiculous that you're just kind of like, you know, it's meant to be absurd and silly at times. So I hope that happens for readers at some points too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think by now people listening and watching will understand why I wanted to have you on to have a chat, because there was so much in this book. I mean, I was sent this book by Midge Raymond at Ashland Creek Press. They published it, and it's very kind of them to think of me, and they sent me this book, and I read it and I was like, I cannot contain this in a book review. I can't, in my 10-minute like little segment book review. I was like, no, I have to talk to this person. Because sometimes like you say, it was supposed to be a satire. People are supposed to laugh. It's supposed to be over the top and like ridiculous. But like it might take, depending on the reader, it might take them a while to realize that it's supposed to be satirical. And so for the first, like, I don't know, third of the book or something, the reader's kind of left wondering, like, did she just say that? Is that where we're going? And the way that came across was in a lot of the vegan messaging, a lot of the eco-conscious messaging. It was very strong and, like you said, very steely in her perceptions of other people. And so I can imagine that kind of messaging would not be everybody's cup of tea, because they might not give it enough of a chance to know that it's supposed to be satirical. And so, yeah, I just wanted to have you on to talk about this, to talk about the strength of messaging in general in ecofiction, because it's a topic that I'm really fascinated in. And as a writer, I think about it all the time. So,
no, that's a great point. Yeah, the vehemence of the messaging definitely comes across, and it's a conversation starter, definitely. And I mean, the reception of the book so far, just amongst friends, amongst family, amongst readers, it's really interesting because the vegans read it and they're just like, oh my God, this is hilarious. Like, this is so funny. This is, you know, I've felt like this. I've been Kara in my life at various points. Like, I admit I too have been sort of an unhealthy, angry vegan at times in my life. And I'm a recovering angry vegan, like still vegan, but like, you know, toning my own approach down. But like Kara is very much the unhealthy, angry version. And so the vegans think it's hilarious. And then the non-vegans are like, book is messed up. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? You know? And they're like,
you are judging every decision I've ever made.
And I'm like, no, not me, Kara. Like, Kara is the one with the biting judgments. I have a much different approach due to my own blunders in my own life with my friends and family in the past. You know, I've been vegan for almost 10 years now. So I run the gamut as far as like the different approaches. And so I just thought with this book, it would be so fun to put that type of angry vegan character into a really ridiculous situation with, you know, where she becomes obsessed with this person who stands for everything that she's against. And she loves Millie. I mean, she's obsessed with her. She wants to spend all of her time with her. And that kind of destruction, it's meant to be kind of metaphor for what happens when we spiral out of control in our grief, in our eco-anxiety. There's a new initiative that's coming out of the university where I got my master's degree, actually, in the UK, the University of East Anglia. They're doing an eco-anxiety, mental health, and like climate activism type of campaign that's run by one of their, I'm not sure if she's a student or a graduate, but they're running this new campaign that's actually trying to help young people cope with their eco-anxiety by building community capacity, basically sparking action from this really devastating sense of depression and anxiety that's coming out of a lot of young folks. So that's exactly the type of movement that we need. And I just thought that this book would be kind of a fun moment to mark this time where there's a lot of people suffering with eco-anxiety. And I think sometimes that humor can be really cathartic, kind of relieving. Yeah. We need to kind of be able to laugh at ourselves sometimes. And I'm saying this from me personally, it's important to be able to laugh at some of the situations we find ourselves in and the feelings that we carry around with us. this book isn't necessarily meant to be an effective piece of vegan activism. You know, it's meant to be a window into a really troubled person's consciousness. So I hope that readers, instead of feeling judged by Kara, I hope that readers can judge Kara. You know, I hope that they sit down and say, you know, why does she feel this way? And what are the points in the text where she's being really vehement and she's really struggling? And what might that be like, as opposed to feeling judged by Kara, because Kara's incredibly judgmental. So I think it's funny that she fancies herself this sort of very compassionate and righteous person, but then the next moment she's just ripping into people, you know, and that's not healthy. Like, to carry around that kind of negativity and judgment against other people, that doesn't get us anywhere. I hope that by the end of the book, people are like, oh, I see, like, we need to take better care of ourselves. We need to be good within our friendships and with our family members. We need to be kind and gentle with each other. Like, we can't be putting all this pressure on ourselves all the time to try to be these perfect consumers, because it's impossible. It's just impossible. I mean, we can always make better choices in our lives, but going overboard in the way that Kara does, it's a recipe for disaster, and she gets into a lot of trouble. So
yes, she does. Yes, she does.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, I mean, going back to, you know, you hope readers respond in a certain way. One of the main things I wanted to talk about in this chat was about writing for your audience and defining who that audience is. So before, when you were writing this book, or when you were thinking about who would be reading it, who did you think your audience would be? Did you think this was a book that would appeal to a wide general audience and that everybody would understand kind of what you were trying to do? Or were you writing for a specific group of people?
Yeah, I think I had in mind the types of people that I've spent the last 10 years working with, the people who work at environmental nonprofits and in, or just in general in the sort of environment, doesn't have to be a nonprofit, but in the kind of environmental sector. There is this relationship between science and advocacy that I find really fascinating. Like, scientists are meant to be objective and rational, and they can't have any biases. We know this is impossible. Obviously, all scientists have biases, but it's, when you're doing work in the world to create a certain outcome, that kind of falls into the advocacy territory. And I think that there's effective advocacy, and then there's ineffective advocacy. And so, yeah, the audience was really for the people who spend their lives dedicated to trying to change the world for the better. And all the different characters that you come across, all the cast of characters that you come, the scientists, the really powerful scientists that fly all around the world to attend conferences and give speeches. Then there's the sort of the introverted and really quiet scientists who just want to do their work and be left alone. But the conversation is so much bigger than that. It's like, we need everybody to step up and to find a way to use their voice in an effective way that reaches people. And again, this isn't meant to be like a piece of effective vegan advocacy. It's meant to be a novel. It's supposed to be a character-driven story and a chance for people to engage with this particular character. If it resonates with people and they feel like they want to look at their lives in a different way, or it made them think about something a little bit differently, that's fantastic. But if they also read it and were just like, she's obnoxious, I don't want anything to do with her, I can't help that. You know, that's fine. Like, that's totally legitimate. And people have said that already. So, but it's going to be like that with anything that we put our mark on. There could be an essay we write, or there could be a scientific study that we put out that gets no attention whatsoever and nobody cares. So we're constantly having to find ways to reach people. And that's kind of a long-winded response to your question about audience. But yeah, I definitely had in mind young people, either climate activists, climate warriors, vegans, people who work in environmental companies or organizations, anyone who's out there actively trying to make the world a better place, and not necessarily, I guess I didn't have the like raging capitalist billionaires as an audience. I didn't think that they'd probably care about this.
We don't need to write for them, I think. I don't think we're going to change their minds with
so that's why there's a
writing.
couple moments where Kara takes punches at the big capitalists, so
the structure of the book, this inciting incident of meeting Millie, it doesn't happen for quite a while. Like you have like a third of the book without her, kind of.
Yeah.
And in that time you set up the ridiculousness that is Kara's like outlook on the world. And in that time you have a few moments where like, should I break up with my boyfriend because he killed a spider? What was it? There was the conversation with her coworker where she was like, oh, I made pork chops over the weekend and it was lovely. And she was like, oh, I don't want to listen to you cannibalistic bitch talk about your baby eating. And I was like, yes. Oh my God. And I think I wasn't quite in the headspace at that point. I was like, it's quite intense. It's quite intense. And I can imagine a few people not being in that headspace would just be like, this is not aimed at me.
This is not for me.
This is not for me. This is not my thing. But I'm just interested, like this is I don't know if I'd call it a risk, but it's an interesting strategy, like making it so satirical and strong message that you kind of risk turning a few people off, but that doesn't seem to bother you at all.
No. And I mean, Midge Raymond and John Yunker of Ashland Creek Press, they're the publishers. They told me that from the beginning, that, you know, obviously they're big fans of it because they wanted to publish it. I was thrilled and honored when it won the Siskiyou Prize for environmental literature. That was just like mind-blowing. Yeah, it's difficult to put your work out there anyway, and it's difficult to write somebody who is kind of an extreme character. But I mean, those are in my mind some of my favorite characters, and some of my favorite books are of really vile people, you know. And I don't think Kara's vile. I just think she's unhealthy and a bit over the top, and she probably needs to take better care of herself, you know. Yeah, it's the debate, it's the ethics of literature, it's the debate about what the responsibility of literature actually is. And I don't think I'm ever going to come to a conclusion about it, but I definitely wanted this to spark some debate for sure.
Oh, I think it will do that. I think it will do that, because I don't think you left any kind of stone unturned here. You talk about travel, you talk about eating meat and wearing leather, and you talk about having kids. That was some of the where she talks about her sister who has 7 kids, and how she's using religion as a reason to have kids. And those are some of the passages where I was like, you are gonna rile up some people when they read this.
There's no way to showcase Kara without some folks raising their hackles, you know. I mean, she offended me at times, you know. I mean, that's the thing, like, I don't agree with everything that she says or that she does. Definitely don't agree with the way that she does things. And I think what bothers me the most about her is just how hideously she views other people, you know. Her really scathing judgments, I mean, they're kind of fun, they're funny sometimes, but you can really start to see that is poisonous for her. You know, she has so much disdain for the world, and I don't think that is the right way to do it. It's not good for her. It's not good for how she lives her life. And so I think if people feel offended by some of her views, that's okay. That's all right, because it's a book and you can close it and you can walk away from it. And better yet, you can get online and you can write a scathing review of it. You know, I would love it if people did that. You know, it's like engage with it. I would be thrilled to have people getting riled up about it to the point where they're just like, let's burn it, like whatever. I mean, like that would be amazing to get that kind of attention, but I don't think that's going to happen. That's the thing. Like, there's a difference between what we feel internally and think, and then how we can portray that in the real world. And I think because I personally had some really bad experiences with people basically asking me why I was vegan when I was younger, and then I would just kind of pull a Kara and just go on a diatribe, as opposed to thinking about it a little bit more and coming up with a thoughtful answer that was framed in a way that would reach that particular person. I think that's probably the most significant thing I've learned in science communication and really climate communication, talking about the science of climate change, talking about the impacts of climate on different communities, on animal communities, on landscapes and ecosystems. it depends on who you're talking to. So you tailor that message. You know, the science is always the same, but the way that you package that message for each individual person or each group of people is different. It was in learning about how to effectively communicate about controversial topics such as climate change that kind of powered this really over the top character to kind of do a poor job of that.
Yeah.
I mean, but like in a lot of ways, Kara's sharing a lot of different facts and figures in there. You know, she has a lot of stats that she's constantly railing off, mainly because she spends a lot of time reading the scientific literature. So she's just not doing it in a pleasant or effective way. And that to me is funny. It's not about punishing ourselves or feeling guilty or feeling like we're not doing enough. I mean, if someone wants to obsess over their toothpaste, that's okay. They can do that. But I think that there's going to come a time when we kind of graduate from the do-gooder consumerism and we start looking for really more substantive community level solutions to the climate crisis that are really much more satisfying than trying to manipulate what kind of toothpaste we're buying. You know, it's much more satisfying than that. And I think that the process of writing this book, that's what I found, because I was going down that path, you know, 5-8 years ago of toothpaste obsession and zero waste obsession and no plastic obsession. It's just kind of like, that's helpful to a certain extent, but eventually that's not going to be quite enough. And I think it's better for us to pool our energies into these community solutions as opposed to our individual choices, even though of course individual choices make a huge difference when you add them all up together, but we can do both.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you respond? I mean, obviously you've written a piece of ecofiction, whether or not you knew about the term before. And how do you respond to the common criticism that ecofiction is considered to be very preachy and therefore not fun to read, and therefore they don't think ecofiction is for them? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I would say then it's not for them. It's definitely not. And there are so many other books out there to read, and that's okay. And then the other side of that is that I think it's important that ecofiction exists because it's a marker. You know, it's a marker in our human history to sort of chart and quantify these shifts in our consciousness. And obviously some books stand out more than others. Obviously, some are always going to be kind of, you know, not a huge following or anything like that, but it's okay because together they kind of make up this new canon of environmental literature, of eco literature, because it charts the way that that our collective understanding of our relationship with nature is changing. And I don't know where it's headed. But you can kind of look back and see where it's been. And that's why it's so fun, which with each of these books, like on your channel, especially like each of these books that you're reviewing and you're reading, you're just like, God, every single one offers a slightly different approach, a slightly different vision. And collectively to look at them together, that is so exciting. And then, you know, my book kind of fits right in here, kind of over here and a little bit down here, maybe a little bit up here. And then it just creates this kind of landscape, this moving landscape of the way humans are looking at their relationship with the natural world. And I think that's really exciting. And just because someone doesn't like a book of a certain eco-fiction genre right now, that doesn't mean that they might not in the future. You know, they might never pick up my book because of the way that it's written and because of the character. And that's okay. But there might be other books out there that eventually they pick up and read and it plants a seed. So that's why I think it's so important that all of these different books get to exist in their myriad different approaches and characters. And because there's a little something for everyone eventually if they decide to pick something up. Yeah.
Do you have any piece of advice for authors who are wanting to write ecofiction, who are trying to decide how strong to make their messaging, and maybe advice for how to write satirically so that people know it's supposed to be over the top and that you're not actually advocating for this kind of like aggression?
Yeah. As far as advice goes, I would say kind of like what we were just talking about before with the array of different eco-fiction novels out there, we need that individual diversity in books. And so if there's a particular book that somebody really wants to write, you know, whether it maybe combines climate grief with sci-fi, with some dystopia, with some magical realism or fantasy, like, write it. I want people to write the book that they want to write. And I don't think it's helpful to cater too much to what you think the market wants, because that desire within yourself to write a particular book is not going to go away. So even if you have to write that book just for yourself, and maybe it never gets published, and then you have to go on and write other books that cater a little bit more to the market, or to, you know, to try to reach certain audiences, that's okay too. But I think that internal feeling is never going to subside. So just write that book and see what happens with it, but then to continue writing, you know, don't just write one, just keep going, write as much as you can, because the opportunity to document this moment in the 21st century it's so important. We kind of need to seize that. If we have the privilege to write, and we have the luxury of being able to make time between jobs and family and friends and needing to work and make money and balance all of our obligations, and we still have the ability to write and to maintain that creativity, that's huge. And we need to let it out. We need to let it into the world. So definitely write the book that you want to write. That's my first advice. And then as far as messaging goes, we had an excellent conversation with author and poet Gretchen Primack a couple of weeks ago with Ashland Creek Press. They had a really lovely afternoon discussion with the poet Gretchen, and she was asked that question: how hard do you go? And she kind of landed on a really interesting suggestion, which was, we live in a non-vegan world. You know, we live in a non-climate friendly world. We live in a world of exploitation and oppression. So in pretty much every way, like, people are oppressed, animals are oppressed, ecosystems and land and rivers, you know, there's so much oppression and destruction happening all in everywhere you look. She was advocating for going a bit harder in the messaging in our creative endeavors, because we live in a world that is so anti nonviolence. You know, we live in a violent world. So to come out with some really more vehement messaging in a creative way, going a little bit harder is okay, because it's a counterbalance to the messaging that we are constantly bombarded with every single day, just in our daily lives. I think I agree with her. I think I agree with that, that we can probably go a little bit firmer in the messaging and our creative writing.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about writing to the market, it's always interesting when I think about ecofiction, looking at where and how it's published, because the question of, oh, but if I don't tone it down, it won't get published. I guess the answer to that is, well, then look for publishers like Ashland Creek Press or Stelliform Press or any of the other. Yes, they're smaller, but they're focused on that kind of messaging, and there is an audience for what you want to write. And if your messaging is environmental and maybe too vehement for the mainstream publishing or something, find somewhere that it's not too vehement for, because there are places that will publish it, because there are people who want it.
Yes, definitely. And that's why, as you said, Ashland Creek Press and other small independent presses are so important. They play such an important role in getting these types of stories out there. As Midge has said in her interviews, she encourages authors that come to her to go get bigger publishers, she says, get more money, get the whole thing. And I'm like, but when you really care about a story, and again, you have the privilege and the luxury to be able to write, and then you have a press like Ashland Creek Press, who's so superb and they're so fantastic in what they do. I just was like, this is it. This is the right choice for me. So yeah, I'm beyond thrilled and honored that Ashland Creek Press picked it up, and working with Midge and John has been a real pleasure. So yeah, there are publishers out there that want these types of stories. So I think people should write them and see what they can do with them once they're out. So there's so many options.
So many, absolutely.
So many. Yeah.
And I guess my last question to you is, where can people find more about you? Where can they find your book? Where can they find anything else that you're working on, and any of your social media platforms?
Yeah. Well, thank you. So my website is aecopenhaver.com, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My handle on both of those is slightly different, but if you just search AE Copenhaver or Copenhaver AE, you'll find me on Twitter and Instagram. My book is for sale online at almost all major retail outlets like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound, bookshop.org. You can pretty much punch it into Google, My Days of Dark Green Euphoria, and it'll take you to a place to buy it. I always recommend going into your local independent bookstore and asking if they'll order the book in for you if you want a physical copy. But if that doesn't appeal, you can definitely go online. Ecolit Books is the actual shop that my publishers run. So I always like to point people to that one as well. But yeah, anywhere you like to buy books is where you can find it. And it's always super helpful, whether people loved it or hated it, leaving a review wherever they bought it. So that's my ask once people do read it, is to consider leaving it a review. So thank you for having me today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed talking to you and getting your perspective on this book that I went through. I went through so many emotional states while reading this book. I was confused, and I was laughing, and then I was affronted, and then I was and then I was on board, and then I was like, no, you've lost me. I have no idea what's happening. That was my emotional journey on while reading this book.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that honest feedback. And I appreciate you reading it and having me on. And it's a huge honor anytime somebody cracks a book and reads it. I mean, it's a time commitment, it's an energy, and as you said, an emotional commitment. And I really appreciate you. So thank you.
Oh, well, this has been so much fun. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And that is all from us. So we will see you next week, Ecofictologists.
Bye.